"Please let me go." She was tied in the square for shame, but the cowboy untied her and asked. In the middle of the town square, Clara sat tied to a rough wooden post, her wrists raw and bruised from the coarse rope. Her dress, once clean and neatly pressed, was now wrinkled and dusty, and her hair, normally tied in a tidy braid, fell in tangled strands across her face. She looked around, her heart racing, as the townspeople began to gather. Their eyes were sharp, cold, and full of judgment, and she felt the weight of every stare pressing down on her. Clara's mind raced. She couldn't understand how things had gone so wrong. Only the day before, she had been helping an old woman carry water from the well when a simple mistake had set everything into motion. Some of the townspeople had misinterpreted her actions, and rumors had spread faster than fire in dry grass. Now she was here, tied and humiliated, with no one to speak for her. She tried to shift her position, wincing as the rope cut into her skin. The shame made her chest ache. She wanted to cry out, to scream, to beg someone, anyone, to help her. But all that came out was a soft, trembling plea. "Please let me go." Her voice cracked, echoing slightly against the wooden buildings surrounding the square. A few children in the crowd giggled nervously, unsure why they were being made to witness this. Adults whispered behind their hands, shaking their heads with disapproval, as though Clara's mistake was unforgivable. Time seemed to stretch endlessly. The sun climbed higher, and the town square became hotter and more uncomfortable. The rope burned her wrists every time she moved, and the rough wood of the post dug into her back. Clara closed her eyes for a moment, trying to block out the faces, the whispers, and the judgments. She remembered the life she had before all this, a life where she could walk freely, laugh, and work without fear of public shame. That life now felt like a distant dream, one she might never see again. A few townspeople began to step closer, murmuring about what she had supposedly done. One man, with a long, graying beard, shook his head and muttered something about responsibility and morals. Another, a woman holding a basket of vegetables, crossed herself and whispered a prayer. Clara felt her stomach twist in knots. She didn't deserve this. She had done nothing wrong, and yet the crowd treated her as though she had committed a terrible crime. She opened her eyes and saw faces she recognized, neighbors, shopkeepers, even friends watching silently. Some avoided her gaze, pretending not to see her suffering. Others stared directly at her, their eyes filled with judgment. She felt tears threatening to fall, but she refused to let them. She couldn't let the crowd see her weakness. She had to hold on, even if she didn't know how. The hours passed slowly. Birds chirped in the distance, and the wind stirred the dust along the streets, but nothing seemed to reach her. She was trapped in a bubble of fear and shame, surrounded by people who had once smiled at her and now treated her like an outcast. Clara remembered her family, how they would react if they saw her here. Her mother would cry, her father would clench his fists in anger, and her younger brother might not understand why this was happening. The thought made her heart ache even more. A few children began to draw closer, curious but cautious. One small boy tugged at his mother's sleeve and asked why Clara was tied up. The mother whispered something about mistakes and punishment, and the child nodded, though his innocent eyes were filled with confusion. Clara wanted to speak to them, to tell them the truth, but the rope and her fear made it impossible. She could only hope they would one day understand that appearances could be deceiving. As the day grew warmer, Clara felt the heat of the sun on her back and shoulders. She tried to shift again, but the rope held firm. Her arms ached, her wrists were numb, and a dull pain spread across her shoulders. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to focus on anything other than the crowd. She imagined herself running through a field of flowers, the wind in her hair, and the sun warm on her face. The image was fleeting but comforting, a small escape from the harsh reality of the town square. The townspeople began to murmur louder now. Some suggested that she had brought this punishment upon herself. Others debated whether it was too harsh or too lenient. Clara could hear snatches of their conversation, but the words felt distant and meaningless. All she knew was that she was still tied here, exposed to the judgment of every person in town. A young girl, no older than 10, approached cautiously and dropped a small piece of bread near Clara's feet. She looked up at her mother, then back at Clara, unsure if she was allowed to help. Clara managed a small, grateful smile, though it barely lifted her spirits. The gesture reminded her that even in the darkest moments, small acts of kindness could shine through. Hours continued to pass. The sun moved slowly across the sky, casting long shadows over the square. Clara's throat was dry and her mouth felt parched. She wished for water, for a kind word, for anyone to stand up for her. She thought of leaving, of running away if only she could untie herself, but the ropes held too tightly. She was completely at the mercy of the townspeople. By mid-afternoon, some of the men began pacing nearby, whispering to each other about what should happen next. The women shook their heads and clutched their skirts. Clara could feel their eyes on her, heavy and unrelenting. She wanted to tell them the truth, to explain what had really happened, but fear kept her silent. She feared that any word could make things worse, that any movement could anger the crowd. Clara's mind wandered back to the morning, to the moment when everything had changed. A simple misunderstanding, a slip of the hand, an innocent mistake, none of it mattered now. The town had chosen sides and she had been left alone. She pressed her face into the rope slightly, trying to find comfort, but there was none. The shame burned inside her like a fire she couldn't put out. The afternoon shadows grew longer and the air became hotter and heavier. Clara felt exhausted physically and emotionally. Her eyes stung and her shoulders ached. She whispered her plea again, softer this time, almost to herself. "Please let me go." But the crowd was indifferent, lost in their gossip and judgment. She felt the hopelessness pressing down on her, threatening to break her spirit entirely. Just when she thought she could endure no more, she heard the distant sound of hooves on the dusty road leading into town. Clara lifted her head slightly, her heart catching in her throat. The sound was slow, steady, and purposeful. She squinted toward the road and saw a figure approaching, a lone rider, silhouetted against the afternoon sun. The townspeople noticed him too, murmuring and shifting nervously. The rider was different from anyone else who had come through Redstone. He rode with a calm confidence, a presence that demanded attention without a word. Clara felt a flicker of hope, a small spark that perhaps someone would see her, understand her, and help. The rider dismounted gracefully in front of the crowd, his boots kicking up a small cloud of dust. His eyes scanned the square, finally resting on Clara. There was no judgment in his gaze, no anger, no ridicule, only concern. He walked slowly toward her, each step deliberate, as if he were measuring the courage it would take to face the crowd. Clara's heart raced. Could this be someone who would help her? Someone who would not leave her tied and shamed? She swallowed hard, trying to steady her trembling voice. She wanted to call out to him, to beg him to intervene, but fear and uncertainty held her back. She simply watched as he approached, hoping silently that this stranger would make a difference. The townspeople whispered among themselves, watching the interaction with curiosity and suspicion. Clara felt the weight of their eyes, but for the first time in hours, she felt a glimmer of relief. Someone had arrived who might see the truth, who might act with courage and compassion. And in that moment, as the wind stirred the dust around her and the sun dipped lower toward the horizon, Clara held onto a fragile thread of hope, praying that this mysterious rider would be the one to change everything. The cowboy's boots crunched softly on the dusty ground as he approached the square, his eyes never leaving Clara. The townspeople began to murmur among themselves, their voices a mix of curiosity, suspicion, and anger. None of them expected anyone to intervene, especially not a stranger. Yet here he was, calm and steady, moving with a quiet confidence that made the whispers fade into uneasy silence. Clara's heart pounded as she watched him come closer. Every step he took seemed to carry authority, a silent promise that perhaps, just perhaps, she would no longer be alone in her shame. The ropes biting her wrists reminded her that she was still trapped, still vulnerable. But the presence of this man gave her courage she hadn't felt in hours. Her eyes followed him, taking in the broad shoulders, the worn hat shading his face, and the strong hands that rested easily on his belt. He looked like someone who had seen the world and had learned to face it with honesty and strength. The crowd parted slightly as he walked up, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "What's going on here?" he asked, firm but calm. There was no trace of anger or ridicule, only genuine concern. He looked around, taking in the post, the ropes, and most importantly, Clara herself. The townspeople hesitated, unsure how to answer. They were used to doing things a certain way, and this man, this stranger, seemed to disrupt their comfortable sense of authority. One of the older men stepped forward, his face red from the sun and years of self-importance. She made a mistake," he stammered, glancing at Clara. "It is our duty to punish her. The town must uphold its standards." His voice shook slightly, betraying the uncertainty he felt in the cowboy's presence. The cowboy's eyes softened as he looked at Clara. "A mistake," he repeated, his tone gentle. "It seems to me she's already been punished enough." His gaze moved back to the crowd. "And how do we know the truth if we only judge her by appearances?" A tense silence fell over the square. Clara could feel the shift in energy, though she didn't fully understand it. Something in the cowboy's words made the townspeople uneasy. His calmness and clarity were unlike anything they had seen before. Some frowned, crossing their arms, while others looked down, suddenly ashamed of the way they had treated her. Clara's throat was dry and she wanted to speak, but fear still held her back. She wasn't sure if this man would believe her or if the crowd would force him to turn away. She swallowed hard and took a deep breath, hoping that somehow he would understand her pain. The cowboy stepped closer, now within arm's reach of the post. He studied the ropes, the knots tight and cruel against Clara's skin. Without a word, he knelt down and began to loosen the ropes, his hands careful and precise. Clara flinched slightly, fearing he might be another townsperson trying to harm her. But the gentle touch reassured her and she let him work, her body relaxing slightly with each knot he untied. "Don't be afraid," he said softly. "I'm not here to hurt you." His voice was calm, steady, and kind. Clara felt tears welling up in her eyes, not from shame this time, but from relief. After what felt like an eternity of fear, someone had come to her aid. Once the ropes fell away, Clara rubbed her wrists, wincing at the raw skin. She looked up at the cowboy, her voice barely a whisper. Thank you. I don't know what to say." Her words trembled, but they carried gratitude and a hint of hope. He offered her a small, reassuring smile. "You don't need to say anything right now. Just tell me what happened." He gestured for her to sit down on the edge of the post, making sure she was steady. Clara took a moment, gathering her courage, and began to speak. She told him about the morning, the accident, the misunderstanding that had led to her being tied in the square. She spoke of how quickly the townspeople had judged her, how their whispers had turned into cruel suggestions of punishment, and how alone she had felt. Her voice shook at times, but the cowboy listened quietly, never interrupting, never judging. His calm presence gave her the strength to continue, and for the first time in hours she felt heard. As Clara spoke, some of the townspeople edged closer, curious despite themselves. They whispered among each other, noticing the cowboy's patient demeanor and Clara's trembling voice. A few of the younger men began to question whether the punishment had been fair. Some of the women lowered their heads, feeling the weight of guilt for their part in spreading rumors. Slowly, a change was beginning in the square, subtle but noticeable. When Clara finished, she looked at the cowboy, her eyes wide and uncertain. Do you believe me?" she asked softly. He nodded. "I do, and anyone who listens carefully would see the truth too." He stood and faced the crowd, placing himself slightly between Clara and the townspeople. "Mistakes happen," he said firmly. "We cannot decide someone's worth or punish them based on rumors or appearances. She has suffered enough today. I suggest we leave judgment to facts, not assumptions." A murmur ran through the crowd. Some shook their heads, unwilling to admit they had been wrong. Others looked at each other with quiet shame, realizing they had acted too quickly. Clara could feel the tension in the air, the slow shift from judgment to uncertainty. It was not complete forgiveness yet, but it was a start. The cowboy offered Clara his hand. "Come with me," he said gently. "You don't need to stay here any longer." Clara hesitated for a moment, then placed her hand in his. The touch was reassuring, warm, and protective. She felt a strange mix of fear and hope as he helped her down from the post. For the first time in the day, she could breathe freely without the constant weight of the ropes. They began to walk slowly toward the edge of the square, keeping a careful distance from the crowd. The townspeople watched in silence, some unsure whether to cheer, jeer, or remain quiet. Clara glanced back at the post, at the place where she had been tied and humiliated. A shiver ran down her spine as she remembered the hours of fear, but she also felt a spark of courage. She had survived this moment, and now someone believed her. The cowboy guided her to a shaded area near the edge of town, away from the crowd and the harsh sun. "You're safe now," he said. "No one can harm you here." Clara took a deep breath, feeling the tension leave her body in small, slow waves. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. "Sometimes all someone needs is a little help," he replied. "No thanks are necessary, just make sure you take care of yourself from now on." His voice was gentle but firm, a steady anchor in the storm that had been her day. Clara nodded, still processing everything. She felt a mixture of relief, disbelief, and cautious hope. The shame of the square was still fresh in her mind, but for the first time it felt manageable. Someone had come to her aid, and that small act of kindness had changed everything. The cowboy noticed her hesitation. "You must have been very brave to endure what you did," he said. "Most would have broken under that kind of pressure, but you didn't. That shows strength." Clara felt tears prick her eyes again, this time not from fear, but from a growing sense of self-worth. For hours she had been treated as though she were worthless, but this man's words reminded her that she still had value. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the town, Clara and the cowboy remained in the quiet of the shaded street. The square behind them was no longer as intimidating, and the townspeople had begun to disperse, some still whispering, others thoughtful and subdued. Clara felt a small spark of courage ignite within her. Perhaps she could face the town again, but now she knew she didn't have to do it alone. The cowboy looked at her with a calm expression. "You have a choice now," he said. "You can go back inside, rest, and gather your strength. Or you can come with me for a while, away from this place, until you're ready to face everyone again." Clara considered his words carefully. The thought of leaving the town, even for a little while, was terrifying but also comforting. She could feel the tension in her body slowly loosening. I think I'd like that," she said softly. The cowboy nodded, offering her a small smile that seemed to carry both reassurance and understanding. Together they began walking down the quiet streets, away from the square, away from the whispers, and toward a place of calm. For the first time in the day, Clara felt a sense of peace. Even as they walked, she knew that the story was not over. The townspeople still had their opinions, and the shame of the square could not simply disappear. But with the cowboy by her side, she felt a strength she had not known before. She realized that courage could take many forms. Sometimes it was enduring shame, and sometimes it was accepting help from someone who truly cared. By the time they reached the edge of town, the sun was low, painting the streets in shades of orange and gold. Clara looked back once more at the square, the post where she had spent hours of fear and humiliation. A quiet determination settled over her. She had survived, she had been believed, and now she had a chance to reclaim her life. The cowboy noticed her glance. "Don't worry," he said gently. "You're not alone anymore. I'll make sure no harm comes to you." Clara nodded, feeling a warmth in her chest that had been absent all day. Hope, she realized, could return even after the darkest moments. Clara walked beside the cowboy, her steps hesitant at first, unsure of what the future would bring. The dusty streets of the town seemed quieter now, yet the memory of the square lingered heavily in her mind. Every corner of the town carried whispers and judgment from earlier, and she couldn't help but glance over her shoulder, half expecting someone to follow and drag her back. The ropes were gone, but the fear still clung to her like a shadow. The cowboy, noticing her unease, spoke gently. "It's okay. No one will harm you now. You're safe." His voice was steady, calm, and full of certainty. Clara drew in a deep breath, trying to believe him. There was something in his presence that made her feel protected, a warmth that contrasted sharply with the cold judgment of the town square. She wanted to trust him completely, and slowly she began to relax. They stopped near a shaded corner where the sun barely touched the ground. Clara leaned against the wall for support, still shaking slightly from the ordeal. I can't believe anyone would treat me like that," she said softly. Her voice was almost a whisper, but it carried the weight of hours of humiliation. "I didn't do anything wrong, and yet everyone looked at me as if I had committed some terrible crime." The cowboy nodded, listening intently. People often judge before they understand. Fear and rumors make even good people act cruelly, but it's not your fault. You were caught in something beyond your control. His words were soothing, but also firm, helping Clara begin to see her own courage in a new light. Clara's eyes filled with tears and she looked down at the ground. "I felt so alone, like I had no one to stand by me." Her voice cracked, and she tried to swallow back the sobs threatening to escape. The cowboy placed a reassuring hand lightly on her shoulder, a gesture of comfort and solidarity. "You weren't alone," he said gently. "I'm here now, and I'll help you, but you also need to remember that your own voice matters. People cannot take your dignity if you hold on to it." Clara listened carefully, feeling the truth in his words. For the first time since that morning, she began to feel a spark of hope, a fragile belief that she could regain her strength and self-respect. The streets were still mostly empty, but as they walked slowly, Clara noticed a few townspeople peering from behind shutters or doorways. Some seemed curious, others wary. The crowd from earlier had dispersed, but the eyes of the town still felt heavy on her. She took a deep breath, feeling the lingering weight of shame, and whispered, "I don't know if I could ever face them again." The cowboy looked at her seriously. "You don't have to face them alone. Sometimes all it takes is one person to stand with you, and that makes all the difference. Today, I stand with you." Clara felt a warmth spread through her chest. She had been battered by fear and humiliation, but his words gave her courage, a reminder that strength could be found even in moments of weakness. As they approached the square again, the townspeople had begun to gather slowly, whispering to each other. Their earlier excitement had faded into unease, and Clara could sense a shift in the air. Some faces showed doubt, others shame. The square that had once felt like a prison now seemed like a place where she could confront the situation, with the cowboy by her side. The cowboy stopped and turned to Clara. "We need to speak to them," he said firmly. "They need to understand the truth." Clara hesitated, fear twisting in her stomach. The thought of facing those angry eyes, the whispers, and the judgment made her heart pound. Yet she also knew he was right. If the truth was not spoken, the rumors and shame would continue to follow her. She nodded, swallowing hard. They walked into the center of the square together, and Clara felt every eye turn toward her. A hush fell over the crowd as they noticed the cowboy standing with her. His presence demanded attention, and the murmurs of gossip quieted into uneasy silence. Clara's hands trembled slightly, but she held her head high, remembering the cowboy's words about dignity and courage. The cowboy began to speak, his voice carrying clearly across the square. This young woman has been judged unfairly. Rumors and misunderstandings should not dictate punishment or shame. We must look at the facts, not assumptions. He turned slightly to Clara, offering a supportive smile. Tell them your story, Clara. Speak your truth. Clara took a deep breath. Her voice trembled at first, but as she began to speak, the words grew stronger. She explained the accident that had led to the misunderstanding, how quickly rumors had spread, and how the townspeople had acted without knowing the truth. She spoke of her fear, her humiliation, and the hours she had spent tied to the post, praying for someone to believe her. The square was silent as she spoke. The townspeople listened, some with furrowed brows, others with lowered eyes. The whispers had stopped, replaced by a heavy stillness. Clara felt a mixture of fear and relief as she continued. For the first time, she was no longer speaking into emptiness. Someone was listening, someone was believing her. The cowboy stood beside her, silent but supportive, his presence giving her the strength to continue. When she finished, she looked around at the crowd. Some faces were filled with shame, others with curiosity. A few whispered quietly among themselves, as if questioning their own judgments. Clara's heart raced, uncertain of what would happen next, but the cowboy spoke again, his voice firm and unwavering. Judgment without understanding is never just, he said. We cannot punish someone for what they have not done. She has endured enough shame today. It is time for fairness and compassion. Some of the older townspeople shifted uncomfortably. The man who had spoken first now looked down, his face red with embarrassment. A few of the women nodded quietly, realizing that their own gossip and judgment had contributed to Clara's suffering. Slowly, a change began to ripple through the square. The anger and ridicule that had filled the air earlier were replaced with doubt, reflection, and for some, a quiet shame. Clara felt a weight lift from her shoulders, though she knew the road to full acceptance would take time. The fact that she had been heard, that the truth was spoken, was already a victory. She looked at the cowboy, gratitude shining in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know what I would have done without you." He smiled gently. "You would have found a way. You've already shown courage by facing this. I'm just here to help guide you." His words reassured her, reminding her that strength often came from facing fear, even when others doubted or judged. Some of the townspeople began to step forward cautiously. A few offered apologies, their voices soft and hesitant. We didn't understand," one said. "We were wrong to act so quickly." Clara nodded, accepting their words with grace, even though the memory of their judgment still stung. She knew forgiveness would take time, both for herself and for the town. A small group of children, curious but innocent, approached slowly. They had been watching from a distance earlier, and now they looked at Clara with a mixture of awe and respect. One little girl handed her a small flower, and Clara accepted it with a shy smile. It was a small gesture, but it meant the world to her. It reminded her that even in the harshest situations, kindness could still be found. The cowboy turned to Clara again. "You've done well. Now it's time to take care of yourself. You've faced the town, spoken your truth, and stood with dignity. That is something no one can take away from you." Clara nodded, feeling a deep sense of relief and pride. She had survived the shame, reclaimed her voice, and begun to rebuild her confidence. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the square, Clara and the cowboy walked toward the edge of town. The townspeople had dispersed, some still whispering, others thoughtful and subdued. The square, once a place of humiliation and fear, now felt different, quieter, almost peaceful. Clara realized that she had endured something difficult and emerged stronger, with the support of someone who had believed in her when no one else would. The cowboy glanced at her and said softly, "This is only the beginning." There will be more challenges, but today you've shown strength, courage, and the power of speaking your truth. Remember that." Clara nodded, taking in his words. She felt a warmth in her chest, a sense of hope she hadn't felt in a long time. For the first time since morning, Clara felt that she could breathe freely again. The shame of the square, the judgment of the townspeople, and the fear that had held her captive for hours were still in her mind, but they no longer controlled her. With the cowboy by her side, she knew she could face whatever came next. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and pink, Clara felt a quiet determination grow within her. She would survive, she would reclaim her dignity, and she would not let fear or judgment define her. The next morning, Clara woke early, still feeling the echoes of the previous day in her mind. The shame of being tied to the post lingered, though it was less sharp than it had been. Now, instead of feeling helpless, she felt a quiet determination growing inside her. The cowboy had stayed in town overnight, and when she saw him waiting outside the small inn where she had rested, she felt a mixture of relief and nervous anticipation. Today, they would face the townspeople again, but this time, she would not be alone. The streets were quieter than the day before. Early risers went about their chores, tending to livestock or sweeping the dusty streets. The square where she had been humiliated seemed to hold its breath, as if it remembered the events of yesterday. Clara felt a shiver run through her spine, a mix of fear and anticipation. She remembered the ropes biting her wrists, the laughter of some townspeople, and the whispers of gossip that had spread so quickly. But she also remembered the cowboy's calm presence and the way he had believed her when no one else did. That memory gave her courage. The cowboy walked beside her, guiding her toward the square with slow, steady steps. "Remember," he said gently, "speak clearly and don't let fear control you. You have the truth on your side. That is more powerful than any rumor." Clara nodded, gripping her hands together to steady them. She felt the fear in her stomach, but it was mixed now with hope and a growing sense of strength. She realized that yesterday, she had survived humiliation, and today, she could begin to reclaim her place in the town. As they reached the square, a small crowd had already gathered. Some were curious, others cautious, and a few, still bitter from the events of yesterday, looked angry. Clara felt their eyes on her, but instead of shrinking back, she stood a little taller. The cowboy stepped slightly in front of her, a protective presence that gave her confidence. The square that had once been a place of shame now felt like a stage for her courage. "Listen," the cowboy said, addressing the crowd. His voice carried over the murmurs, firm and calm. "Yesterday, many of you judged this young woman unfairly. Today, it is time to hear the truth and act with fairness." He turned to Clara. "Speak, Clara, tell them everything." Clara took a deep breath, her throat dry but her resolve steady. She spoke slowly at first, explaining the misunderstanding that had led to her punishment. She described the accident, the innocent mistake that had been twisted into gossip, and the fear she had felt when tied to the post. Her voice grew stronger as she continued, detailing the pain of being publicly shamed and the isolation that had accompanied it. The crowd listened in silence, though some faces were still skeptical. A few murmured among themselves and some looked down, feeling the weight of their own past words and actions. Clara's words, simple but honest, carried a force that could not be ignored. The story of her suffering and the truth of the events slowly began to reach the hearts of those who had judged her too quickly. The cowboy nodded encouragingly as she spoke. He knew that words alone could not undo the damage, but he also understood that Clara's courage in speaking her truth was the first step toward healing. He stood beside her, silent but firm, letting her words take center stage while he ensured no one could interrupt or intimidate her. When Clara finished, she looked around at the crowd. The faces she had once feared now showed different expressions. Some were filled with shame, others with curiosity, and a few with admiration. A man who had been particularly harsh yesterday stepped forward slowly. I may have been too quick to judge," he admitted, his voice low and hesitant. "I didn't know the full story. I am sorry." Clara felt a mix of relief and hesitation. The apology was small, but it meant something. She nodded slightly, acknowledging it. "Thank you," she said softly. "It is not easy to admit when we are wrong, but it is important." Her words were measured and calm, showing that she had grown stronger in the past day, and that she was no longer merely a victim of circumstances. Other townspeople began to step forward, some apologizing quietly, others offering small gestures of kindness. One woman placed a hand on Clara's shoulder, saying, "I should not have whispered those rumors. I am sorry for causing you pain." Children who had watched from the edges of the crowd smiled shyly, understanding in a small way that kindness and courage could overcome fear and gossip. Clara felt a warmth in her chest she hadn't felt since before her humiliation. The shame and fear that had weighed on her were slowly lifting, replaced by a growing sense of dignity and strength. She realized that she had endured something very difficult and come out stronger on the other side. And while the town would take time to fully accept her, she knew she had the power to reclaim her life. The cowboy spoke again, his voice carrying over the now quiet square. "It takes courage to speak the truth and to face judgment. Today, Clara has done both. Let this be a lesson for all of us. Assumptions and rumors should never dictate our actions. Compassion and understanding are always stronger than shame and cruelty." A few of the townspeople nodded, their heads lowered in agreement. Others looked thoughtful, realizing that their own actions had contributed to Clara's suffering. Even the children seemed to understand, whispering among themselves about the importance of fairness and kindness. The square that had once been filled with ridicule and anger was now slowly transforming into a place of reflection and learning. Clara turned to the cowboy, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly. "I don't know what I would have done without you." He smiled gently. "You don't need me to protect you forever. Today, you've shown courage and strength. That is something no one can take away from you, but it is okay to have someone by your side when the road is difficult." Clara nodded, feeling a new sense of confidence. She realized that courage did not mean facing everything alone. It meant standing up for oneself, speaking the truth, and accepting help when it was offered. She had survived public shame, faced the judgment of her neighbors, and begun to reclaim her dignity. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting warm light over the town, Clara and the cowboy walked slowly through the square. Some of the townspeople lingered, watching them with newfound respect and understanding. Others went about their daily tasks, their whispers quieter, their actions more thoughtful. The air that had been thick with judgment and fear now felt lighter, filled with possibility and hope. Clara felt a small smile tug at her lips. She had faced the town, spoken her truth, and been supported by someone who believed in her. She knew there would be challenges ahead, but she also knew that she had the strength to face them. And for the first time since the morning of her humiliation, she felt truly free. The cowboy noticed her smile and said quietly, "You've done very well. Today was not easy, but you've shown courage that will carry you far. Remember this feeling, this strength, and hold on to it no matter what comes next." Clara took a deep breath, feeling the warm sun on her face and the cool wind against her skin. She felt a sense of hope and possibility, knowing that she had survived the harshest judgment the town could give and had come out stronger. She realized that dignity and courage were not given by others. They were found within oneself, nurtured by truth, honesty, and the support of those who truly cared. As the day went on, Clara began to interact with the townspeople more comfortably. Some approached her cautiously, asking if she was all right, while others smiled and offered small gestures of kindness. Clara responded with gratitude, feeling the healing power of empathy and connection. The shame that had once dominated the square was fading, replaced by understanding, reflection, and cautious forgiveness. By late afternoon, Clara and the cowboy stood at the edge of the square, watching the town go about its daily life. The square, once a place of humiliation, now felt like a space of transformation. Clara had faced the worst of public judgment, reclaimed her voice, and begun to rebuild her life. The cowboy's presence had given her courage, but the strength she had shown on her own had also been remarkable. Clara turned to him and said softly, I think I am ready now. Ready to face the world, ready to face the town, and ready to live my life without fear." The cowboy smiled. "That is all anyone can ask for. Remember, courage is not the absence of fear. It is moving forward despite it. Today, you've proven that in every way." Clara nodded, feeling a deep sense of accomplishment. The square was no longer a place of shame. It had become a symbol of her resilience, her courage, and her ability to stand tall even when others judged her unfairly. She knew that life would continue to have challenges, but she also knew that she had the inner strength to face them, and the support of someone who truly believed in her. As the sun began to set, casting golden light over the town, Clara felt a profound sense of peace. The journey of fear, shame, and uncertainty had brought her to a place of strength, dignity, and hope. And with the cowboy by her side, she knew that no matter what came next, she would face it with courage, honesty, and grace. The morning sun rose slowly over Redstone, casting a warm, golden glow over the town. Clara stepped outside, taking in the familiar streets with a sense of quiet confidence she had never felt before. The square where she had once been tied, humiliated, and left alone now seemed different. It no longer held the weight of shame and fear. Instead, it felt like a place of possibility, a symbol of the courage and dignity she had reclaimed. The cowboy walked beside her, as steady and calm as ever. He had stayed nearby, not because she needed constant protection, but because he understood the value of support when someone was learning to rebuild their strength. "Today," he said gently, "is about moving forward. You faced fear and judgment, spoken the truth, and reclaimed your voice. Now it's time to live without letting the past control you." Clara nodded, feeling the warmth of the sun on her face and a sense of determination in her chest. She thought back to the moments when she had felt utterly alone, the hours tied to the post, the whispers of the townspeople, and the unbearable shame. But now she also remembered the moments of hope, the cowboy's calm presence, the support of a few brave townspeople, and the courage she had discovered within herself. That courage had carried her this far, and she knew it would guide her forward. As they approached the square, a small group of townspeople gathered. This time, there was no judgment in their eyes, only curiosity and cautious respect. A few smiled at her, offering quiet gestures of apology. Clara returned their smiles, feeling a mix of relief and pride. She realized that forgiveness, both given and received, was a powerful step toward healing. The cowboy spoke first, addressing the crowd. "This young woman has shown courage and dignity that we should all admire. Yesterday, many of us judged too quickly. Today, we see the strength it takes to face fear, speak the truth, and stand tall despite the odds. Let this be a reminder to all of us that kindness, understanding, and fairness are far stronger than rumors and assumptions." The crowd listened in silence, absorbing his words. Some nodded slowly, their expressions thoughtful. Others whispered quietly among themselves, reflecting on their actions from the previous day. A few of the older men and women stepped forward, offering quiet apologies. "I am sorry for my part in spreading rumors," one man said. "I didn't know the truth and I judged too quickly." Clara's heart lifted. She accepted the apologies with grace, feeling the weight of yesterday's shame lighten even further. "Thank you," she said softly. "I know it is not easy to admit when we are wrong, but doing so shows courage too." Her voice was steady now, filled with confidence and a quiet strength that had not been there before. The children in the crowd approached as well, their eyes wide with curiosity. One young girl handed Clara a small flower, while a boy shyly offered a piece of bread. Clara accepted their gestures with gratitude, smiling warmly. These small acts of kindness reminded her that the world was not entirely harsh and cruel. Even in the midst of judgment, there was always room for compassion, hope, and human connection. The cowboy placed a hand lightly on her shoulder, giving her a reassuring smile. See, courage inspires others. Today, you have not only reclaimed your dignity, but you have also reminded this town of the value of understanding and empathy. Clara nodded, feeling a deep sense of pride. She had faced fear, humiliation, and public judgment, and she had come out stronger on the other side. Over the next few hours, Clara walked through the town with the cowboy by her side. People greeted her differently now, with respect rather than judgment. Shopkeepers nodded politely, and neighbors offered quiet smiles. The sense of community that had once been overshadowed by fear and gossip was slowly returning. Clara realized that one person's courage could influence many, and that standing for truth and dignity could change even the hardest hearts. As the day progressed, Clara began to reflect on what she had learned. The experience had been painful, humbling, and frightening, but it had also revealed her inner strength. She realized that shame could only control her if she allowed it to, and that fear could be overcome when faced with honesty and courage. Most importantly, she learned that kindness, both given and received, had the power to heal wounds and restore hope. The cowboy noticed her thoughtful expression. "You're thinking about everything that happened," he said gently. "That's good. Reflection is important, but remember, the past does not define you. You define yourself by the choices you make and the courage you show." Clara smiled, feeling a sense of clarity she had not experienced before. She realized that while the town's judgment had been painful, it had also given her the chance to discover her own strength and resilience. She had been pushed to the edge, but she had survived, and in doing so, she had become stronger than she had ever imagined. As the sun began to set, painting the town in warm shades of orange and gold, Clara and the cowboy returned to the square. The place that had once been a symbol of humiliation now felt like a stage for triumph. She looked around, seeing familiar faces, some still shy, others filled with respect. She felt a quiet sense of satisfaction, knowing that she had faced her fears and reclaimed her dignity in the very place where it had been taken from her. The cowboy spoke softly, almost as if sharing a secret. "Courage is not the absence of fear, Clara. It is acting despite fear. Today you have shown more courage than most people will ever know. Hold on to this strength. It will guide you through the rest of your life." Clara nodded, feeling the truth of his words settle in her heart. As the town began to quiet down, Clara realized that she was ready to take the next step. She could return to her daily life, confident in herself, and ready to rebuild relationships that had been strained by misunderstanding and gossip. She could face the world with dignity and courage, knowing that she had endured the worst and emerged stronger. The cowboy gave her a small smile, sensing her determination. "You're ready now," he said. "Go forward with courage, honesty, and kindness. And remember, even when the road is difficult, you are not alone." Clara felt a wave of gratitude and hope. She had faced public shame, judgment, and fear, yet she had survived. She had discovered her inner strength, reclaimed her voice, and experienced the power of compassion and support. She knew that life would continue to have challenges, but she also knew that she had the courage to face them head-on. As evening fell, Clara and the cowboy walked through the quiet streets, their shadows stretching long across the town. Clara felt a sense of peace she had not known since before her humiliation. The journey had been painful, but it had also been transformative. She had grown stronger, wiser, and more resilient. Before parting ways, the cowboy turned to her one last time. "You've done well," he said softly. Remember today, remember your strength and carry it with you always. Life will test you, but now you know that courage and truth can overcome even the darkest moments. Clara nodded, feeling tears of relief and gratitude in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." He tipped his hat with a gentle smile and replied, "The courage was always yours. I just helped you see it." As he rode away, Clara watched him disappear down the dusty road, feeling a mix of sadness and gratitude. She realized that while he had been her guide, her protector, and her friend, the true strength had always been within her. She had faced fear, endured public shame, and reclaimed her dignity. And now she was ready to live fully, with courage, hope, and self-respect guiding her every step. Clara returned to her home, feeling the warmth of the evening sun on her face. She walked through her door with a sense of triumph, knowing that the events of the past days had changed her forever. She had learned that even in the darkest moments, hope could return, courage could be found, and compassion could heal wounds. From that day forward, Clara lived with a renewed sense of purpose. She faced life with honesty and bravery, never allowing the fear of judgment to control her. She treated others with kindness, understanding, and empathy, knowing firsthand how powerful those qualities could be. And though the memory of the square remained, it no longer held her back. It had become a symbol of strength, resilience, and the courage to stand tall even when the world seemed against her. In time, the townspeople came to respect Clara for her bravery and integrity. The whispers of judgment faded, replaced by admiration and quiet acknowledgement of her courage. She became a source of inspiration for others, a living reminder that dignity and truth could withstand even the harshest scrutiny. And so, Clara's story came full circle. What had begun as a day of fear, shame, and humiliation ended in hope, redemption, and strength. She had faced the town, reclaimed her voice, and learned the power of courage and compassion. And in doing so, she discovered something even more valuable: the unwavering strength that resided within herself.